Hello and welcome to another episode of Hair Bear Short Stories. And if you found your way to my cozy little corner of the internet, and you like a story or two, sit back and relax, have a listen, have a laugh, take your shoes off, and set a spell. So my plan today is to continue on with Chapter 5 of Whole, but it comes along with a massive trigger warning. I didn't like writing this chapter. I'm really not sure if I have it in me to read it today, but I'm going to give it a shot. But it's a necessary evil for the plot to continue as I intended it to, and you have to have a tragedy. And this is one I really don't like. It hits really close to home, and I just want to point out, and perhaps as a little hint of what it is, I wrote this chapter long before John Wick came out. And if anyone listening is sensitive to violence, particularly against animals, I suggest you give this chapter a miss, and you can make out what happened from the context, and just take it as read that something bad happened. But on that note, let's continue on and see how we do. This is Chapter 5 of Whole, Man's Best Friend. Another education Ben was receiving, albeit inadvertently, as a consequence of his current endeavors, was that of relative value. For example, when he had been young, he would employ every trick in a 6-year-old's arsenal to avoid going to bed. From everything as artful as feigning incontinence, to something so straightforward as entangling himself in the stairway railing and screaming and/or holding his breath until he turned blue. Every extra minute out of bed was a small victory. Sleep was something he was made to do between periods of play. Now, sleep was sought after with the same vague determination of a drunk trying to stow a half-empty bottle in his pants pocket. Sleep would be a pleasant dream if he, in fact, ever got enough of it to do so. His most current attempt at a contiguous 8-hour stretch following Nana's departure that afternoon was sullied by a persistent thumping at the door. Simple knocking graduates to thumping when the supplicant is keen enough to continue despite the inevitable sore knuckles and is obliged to use the heel of their hand. Such was the draw of blessed slumber that this may have been ignored had Scruff not decided to take up the cause to rouse him. Although Ben had had some success in training Scruff not to whittle on the carpet in the event of a visitor, the stumpy dog still held firmly to the belief that a knocking on the door heralded an apocalyptic event which could only be averted by barking madly, attempting to run through the wall, and attacking any piece of furniture which may be in league with the insurgent. At the moment, he was alternately spinning on the spot and trying to dismember the doorknob. "Yeah," he said. "Ándale, güey, necesito ayuda," came the shout from outside. Scruff, seeing his master was now awake, assumed the situation was therefore well in hand, and began to lick Ben's ear. Ben swatted the dog away, stumbled to the door and wrenched it open, waggling his little finger in his ear to dislodge some of the dribble. "Was it?" A lean figure stood silhouetted against the twilight. "Oh," said Ben, stifling a yawn. "Hey, Gato. You're working late. What's up?" Gato looked sheepish, an attitude he rarely displayed. "You were sleeping?" he said tentatively. "Yeah, double shifts today." "Lo siento, my friend. I would not wake you, but..." He pointed off into the vineyard. "The tractor is broken. I tried to fix it alone, but it is getting dark." Ben took a deep breath and shook himself. Well, there would be time for rest later. His next life, perhaps. "Okay," he said. "Let me get dressed and grab a flashlight." Gato grinned gratefully and nodded. "Gracias, Toro. I wait here." Toro, Ben thought. Bull. That's what Gato's crew had taken to calling him. Not in reference to his strength, but to his growing energy drink habit. After his third can, he got a little wild-eyed. Ben was pleased when he had earned the appellation. It seemed to be the crazy crew's way of telling him that he was almost good enough to be a Mexican. Even so, he thought as he grabbed his flashlight and headed for the door, I really need to lay off this stuff. Ben and Gato set off into the thickening gloom, Scruff tagging along at their heels. After about 15 minutes of tramping through the vineyards, Ben asked, "How far out were you?" "Not much farther," Gato replied. He pointed ahead, the next road. "The guys didn't stay to help?" Ben asked. They leave just before, shrugged Gato.
What about fixing it in the morning when they come back?
Ben persisted, intent now on exploring alternatives to the course of action he was already committed to, like someone investigating a cavity with their tongue and wondering if they should have called the dentist already. I think of that also, but it is on the road. If someone break in or steal something, es mi burro. Ben opened his mouth, then closed it again. They continued walking. After a thoughtful moment, Ben asked carefully,
Gato, are you trying to say that if anything happens to the tractor, it's your ass?
Yes, that is what I said.
Right.
The row emptied out onto a dirt access road, where, lo and behold, a tractor-shaped shadow appeared to their right. Ben shined his flashlight toward it, and finally comprehended the scope of Gato's predicament. The tractor's axle had snapped, and the entire vehicle listed to one side. The jack and toolbox sitting beside the tire were on the tractor all the time, but also on the ground beside them was the new axle. Gato must have walked all the way to the garage to the other side of the vineyard and back to get it. Poor bastard. Gato must have spent hours trudging around to get the replacement part while Ben had been enjoying his wine, and here he was moaning about getting his beauty sleep. He nodded at Gato, and they set to work. Basic mechanical know-how was also something he had been learning from the vineyard workers. They had gotten the tractor jacked up and the sheared axle removed when they heard an engine roaring not far away. Ben saw Gato's expression tighten, the flashlight casting fearsome shadows across his features as he glowered in the direction of the sound. It was not unheard of for teenagers to go joyriding through the vineyards at night. The plantations were far too vast to employ any preventative measures more sophisticated than a locked gate. Bolt cutters weren't difficult to come by, and failing that, even a good sturdy chain can succumb to a half-ton vehicle traveling at 40 miles an hour. The landowners took a dim view to such nocturnal activities for many reasons, the least of which being simple trespassing. It was expensive to repair the damage done to the dirt access roads, which were not intended for high speeds, and the dust settling on the vines could cause mite infestations. Usually, if Gato saw anyone in the fields after dark, he would report them to the local police. Even he didn't relish the thought of confronting drunk, rowdy kids in the dead of night. They should be relatively safe, Ben thought. They were deep in the vineyard, and there were miles of access roads. It was unlikely they would... Oh no. A single beam of light swerved wildly toward them at the end of the road, accompanying the revving engine. Apparently, the occupants of this particular vehicle had opted for crashing the gate versus cutting the chain. Not a good sign. The light accelerated toward them along the arrow straight access road. As it approached, Ben had a growing urge to dive for cover in the vines, but Gato calmly stood his ground in front of the disabled tractor, so he fought the urge for solidarity's sake, if not just to show that he wasn't a wimp. Gato would not leave the tractor to be possibly ravaged, especially now that he knew someone had broken in. Besides, the vines had recently been pruned and were strung on wire in long, straight rows. They wouldn't provide very good cover, even in the dark. The car approached rapidly, closing the distance. Just as it looked as though it would run headlong into them, the front of the car dipped and the gravel churned beneath the wheels as the brakes locked up. It skidded to a stop 10 feet from where they stood, dust clouds swirling around the one remaining headlight. Up close, Ben could make out that the car appeared to be some kind of souped-up SUV. No wonder it had been able to batter down the gate. 3 figures jumped down from the jacked-up rig, whooping and laughing. The headlights stayed on, illuminating the tableau as the interlopers sauntered out of the shadows. The first of them to come into view was tall, athletically built, with jet-black hair and heavy brows. He wore a polo shirt with a popped collar and an easy smile which plainly said, "I will acknowledge your existence for as long as it amuses me." The second, flanking him to the right, was small, with heavily gelled-up hair, an unpleasantly angular face, and he stood in a slight crouch. His appearance, taken altogether, gave one the impression that he had a weasel or similar creature somewhere in his ancestry. The third, who stood behind and to the left, looked like a Neanderthal throwback who probably enjoyed sports which involved locking someone's face into his armpit. A sun visor was strapped backwards and upside down to his giant sloping head in a flagrant disregard of its intended purpose, particularly since it was after dark. It's in the name and everything. They were all expensively dressed in casual designer clothes, and had the general air of those who felt they could do as they pleased, and probably did.
"What's the matter, Pedro?" slurred Pop Collar. "Did your donkey break down?"
He paused to allow the compulsory round of sycophantic sniggering from his cronies. "You should not be here," Gato said evenly. "This is private property. Leave here and go home." Ben winced. Gato, a foreign field hand, had just told 3 young and apparently drunk members of a privileged social class that they couldn't do something. He tensed indecisively. His instinct was to run, but he couldn't leave Gato, and Gato wasn't going to abandon his responsibility. Pop Collar gasped theatrically and raised his hands to his cheeks.
"Private property? Oh no!"
he said in falsetto. More sniggering.
"Whose property is it, Jose? Not yours. You even know who I fucking am?"
"Friggin' cholo," growled Hairgel. "Thinks he can get all mouthy with real people."
Sunvisor, his simian face screwed up in confusion, turned to him.
"So there's, like, fake people?"
he rumbled. Hairgel paused, off balance, this new direction of the conversation apparently catching him flat-footed.
"Well,"
he began.
"'Cause,"
Sunvisor continued, following a glacier-like train of thought,
"if they aren't made of, like, real people stuff, what are they made of? Couldn't you tell?"
Hairgel's mouth hung open for a second, but he rallied.
Nah, they're not made of fake stuff. They just don't matter. They do the shit work and they stay quiet, or another one of them does it. It's like they're not even there."
Sunvisor appeared to run this through his prehistoric processing system as he slowly looked over at Gato, and then back to Hairgel.
"But he's standing right in front of us,"
he asserted.
"I can see him."
"That's not—"
"Both of you shut the fuck up!"
shouted Pop Collar without turning around. He seemed upset that the unscripted byplay was drawing too much attention from him.
"Yeah,"
Hairgel replied sheepishly.
"Sure, Chris."
Ben looked at Gato. English wasn't his strong suit, and he wasn't likely to get any further making declarative statements that the boys should leave. Ben was far from silver-tongued, but it looked like the talking was going to be up to him. Fortunately, this was familiar territory, and Ben knew how to de-escalate a situation with a jackass puffed up on his own self-importance. Stroke his ego. When it came to avoiding a beating, Ben had no pride.
"Look, guys," he stammered. "Obviously we can't stop you from going anywhere you want."
This earned him a sharp glance from Gato. He would have to try to explain it to him later, but he had bigger problems at the moment.
"We just don't want any trouble."
"You think I give a shit about what you want?"
snapped Chris, knee popped collar.
"No, that's not what I—"
Chris cut him off again.
"I just heard you wrong then? You and Jose aren't trying to tell me to get the fuck out?"
"I don't—"
"Shut him up,"
Chris ordered, contemptuously waving his right hand forward, apparently indicating that the brute behind him should go clamp Ben's mouth closed.
"Wait, that wasn't right."
I, Ben stammered.
"Huh,"
chuckled Sunvisor as he closed in on Ben.
"Look at him pee his pants. He looks like a bunny."
Ben wished he could pee his pants. If they started laughing at him, maybe they would forget about violence and leave. Drunk people aren't often so firmly set to a course of action that they can't be distracted. But there was a tension to this confrontation, a predatory feeling in the stance and posturing of the invaders that was only getting more pronounced. Something unfamiliar and malevolent glinted in the ringleader's eyes, and the 2 others fed off the energy like a knot of hungry coyotes. By the grim set of Gato's jaw, it seemed he felt it too. They weren't interested in talking. Gato smoothly stepped in front of Ben and stared down the approaching behemoth. "Leave now," he hissed. Now Ben saw the logic in Chris sending the largest one after him. It was to draw Gato's attention away from the weaselly figure that had also left his place behind his captain to circle around them. Moonlight glinted briefly off something metallic in his hand. Cold realization raced up Ben's spine as he suddenly saw it all. It wasn't much of a secret that field hands were sometimes housed nearby in some of the peripheral vineyards with their families. They weren't drunk, not so much as they seemed anyway, and Ben knew exactly what they were after. They weren't young one-percenters out for a joyride. They were predators, out for blood.
Oh, God.
First things first, he needed to distract Sunvisor so Gato could deal with the armed attacker, preferably without either of them getting mauled or gutted in the process. Quickly stooping to heft a baseball-sized dirt clod, Ben pitched it directly into Sunvisor's face, simultaneously shouting, "Gato, behind you!" With Sunvisor suddenly preoccupied with wiping grit from his watering eyes, Gato spun around. The shadow struck, but Gato was faster. His hand shot out, whiplash fast, and grabbed Hairgel's knife hand by the wrist, twisting it deftly in a direction it was not meant to bend. There was a muted crack, and the attacker's face went pale with sudden pain as the knife spun off into the darkness. Chris made good on the momentary distraction, however, and aimed a punch at the side of Gato's head. Clearly not much of a pugilist, his blow was awkward and off balance, but still glanced off Gato's temple. All plans to avoid fighting long since abandoned, Ben darted forward to help his friend. The only clear path he could see to safety was through the violence. His way was suddenly blocked by a wide slab of prepware. "Come here, Bunny." Sunvisor's thick hand swung toward him. Ben threw himself backward to avoid the unexpected grab and landed on his butt. To gain more distance, he used the momentum of his lunge to roll back over his shoulder to his knees and to his feet. He had barely regained his balance when the hulking figure closed on him again. There was no technique to the attack as Sunvisor reached, grabbed, swatted, and punched. He was deceptively fast for his size, though, and Ben, experienced at being swung at, dodged and jinked like a cornered mongoose. He tried to find an opening to slip past Agato's aid, but he found none. He made no attempt to deflect or roll with a punch. That kind of rope-a-dope stuff didn't work too well when your attacker was 5 times your weight. And there it was, the opening that Ben needed, widening as Sunvisor followed through with his latest backhanded swipe. Ben shot forward toward the gap under his opponent's armpit. Faster than seemed possible, the burly young man reversed the swing and struck a ringing, open-handed slap across the side of Ben's face, sending him tumbling into the dust. When his vision cleared enough to look up, he saw Sunvisor lifting his foot, preparing to bring his full weight down on Ben. Where it hit him wouldn't matter. Any part of Ben's body getting hit with all the force that gorilla could muster would leave him unable to do much but drool for the foreseeable future. Even as he gathered himself for a sideways roll to avoid the stomp kick, he knew it was not fast enough. That's when Sunvisor's crotch suddenly sprouted a worn leather boot. The bulky youth's eyes crossed as he slowly overbalanced and toppled over sideways. And there was Gato. Ben had never been so glad to see the Cheshire Cat grin, be it slightly marred by dirt and blood. Gato reached down to help Ben to his feet, and behind him it rose, like a demon from the 9th circle of hell. Chris must have gotten the crowbar from the open toolbox beside the tractor. Blood flowed from his nose and a cut on his eyebrow, but his face shone with a terrible joy as he drew back the steel bar preparing to strike. Ben was frozen in place. He tried to cry another warning, but was unable to make more than a hoarse croak. He didn't have to. Gato saw the look in his eyes and turned to face the attacker. He wasn't fast enough to completely avoid the blow, though he managed to avoid being struck in the head. The crowbar connected with his shoulder with a dull thump. Gato spun to the ground, an attempt to catch himself with his injured arm resulting in a cry of pain as he crumpled to the ground. Chris advanced on Gato, raising the crowbar over his head as Ben watched in mute horror. Somewhere, in a deep black pit, something terrible strained against failing bonds. A low growling sound at knee height tore across the scene, leaving puffs of dust in its wake. Chris's arms flexed as he prepared to club Gato in the back of the head, then yelped as Scruff sank his teeth into his ankle, and jumped in circles on one leg, flailing about with the other foot and trying to extricate it from the small jaws. Scruff hung on gamely as he was tossed erratically about. Ben finally managed to make his legs obey his brain and made a charge towards Chris, but was immediately brought up short as Hairgel appeared behind him. He gripped Ben by the wrist and painfully twisted his arm up his back. Thin as he seemed, his grip was like steel. Ben looked helplessly at Gato, who was raising himself up on his uninjured arm, but was driven again to the ground as Sunvisor threw himself on top of the rangy Mexican, sending the air whooshing audibly from his lungs. Chris reached down, grabbed Scruff by the back of the neck, and with a grimace of pain yanked him free of his ankle.
Scruff, no!
Ben yelled, and immediately recognized his error. A look of unfettered glee suffused Chris's face as he held up the snarling, spitting dog.
Scruff, huh? Aw, that's real cute. Is he your pet?
He said.
No,
I bet he knows how to shake,
Chris went on, ignoring him. He took Scruff's paw and shook it theatrically up and down as Scruff tried to bite him. Then he jerked the paw sideways with a loud pop. Scruff ceased snarling and howled in pain. Ever searching the inky blackness, the foul creation looked up and saw a pinprick of light. Ben lunged forward, but could not escape the excruciating arm lock. Gato flailed and screamed in Spanish, trying to get up but was held fast by the sheer weight.
Oops, I guess he never learned that one,
Chris drawled. Let's try the other side. Another pop, another anguished howl. Senseless now of the pain, Ben hauled against the hold, heedless of his gradually dislocating shoulder. His other arm was taken and twisted back, further immobilizing him.
Now, you shouldn't have pets if you can't train them properly,
Chris said, wagging an admonishing finger at Ben.
We'll just have to keep trying.
One after the other, Scruff's joints were snapped out of place. When all his legs dangled uselessly, Chris started on his tail. This was not the casual cruelty of the upper class. This was not petty malice. This was pure evil. Pain for the sake of pain. All the while Scruff howled and yelped, his brown eyes looking to Ben, pleading his master to make it stop. Ben raved. He screamed and cursed as he continued to pull against his subduer. His chest lanced with white-hot pain as though it would tear apart. The blood roared in his head until he was completely insensible to Gato beside him, clawing his fingers bloody against the ground, or even to Hairgel jeering in his ear. Racing now, clawing and tearing through the darkness, up toward the bright and widening light.
Well, I guess this one's just no good,
said Chris finally. He held Scruff at arm's length and dropped him to the ground. Ben sobbed and choked as Scruff tried to crawl toward him on his mangled legs. Chris shrugged. Guess we gotta throw it back. He drew back his leg and kicked hard. His foot connected with Scruff's ribs with a sickening crack. The small dog was flung the entire width of the road, and he landed in the vines in a small, furry heap. A black wall rushed up and struck Ben full in the face. Whew. Had to take a minute there. Yeah, if anyone follows my shorts on YouTube here, they've seen I lost my boy a little while ago, so you can see why I have a hard time with this one. But if you made it through with me, tell me what you think in the comments, and if you want to yell at me for being such a bastard as to write and read this in the first place, feel free. But if you did enjoy this chapter, please slap a paw on the like and subscribe button, and hopefully we'll see you in the next one. Until then, take care, be good, and bear up.